I'm Erica Hollingsworth, and you're listening to the F1 podcast.
What's up, everyone? It is Ricci here from the F1 podcast. Today is Wednesday, June 12th. I'm here with Erica Hollingsworth. A couple of days have happened since the Canadian Grand Prix. What a weekend it was in Montreal, from the rain to the rain to the sun. It didn't really matter. Erica, how are you? Good to see you again. Long time no see.
Oh my God, it's been like a whole 30, 40 hours or whatever since we last saw each other, Ricci. I am doing so well. I am so tired. I am also incredibly sad that it is not a GP weekend that we're attending this coming weekend. But I'm excited to talk all things Canada because what a weekend it was.
I think this is the race of the season. Don't you
So
think so?
far, absolutely. Yeah, like from craziness even in the practice sessions to an exhilarating qualifying. I don't think I've seen that exciting a qualifying in a while to even more excitement on race day. Like talk about the weekend to end all weekends so far this season. Like round nine brought the heat, and it's going to be hard to see the rest of the races keep up. Say metaphorical heat because it was definitely not hot at the track most of the weekend. So.
And I think I was going to say, tune in next week. We're going to have our Red Bull expert, Tyler Hathroll, and we're going to have a fun episode next week talking about some of the stories and some of the things that we experienced at the track at Circuit Gilles Villeneuve. So let's get right into it. Fastest lap was set by Lewis Hamilton at 1:14. And I think, Erica, you're going to take a shot at this. I mean, you were there in the hairpin. Think you summarize 3 days in a minute and 14 seconds? Is that even
Oh
possible?
boy, we're going to see what happens.
All right, let me know when you're ready. No, I'm not sending this to 1 hour.
Yeah, don't set it to an hour. Lord knows I can carry on, but an hour might be a little excessive. Okay,
All right,
tell me when you're pressing the button.
it's gonna go 1 sec 15. So three, two, one.
The 2024 Canadian Grand Prix got off to a bit of a wet start with the weather playing all kinds of tricks on us. We went from hot to cold, wet to dry through all of our practice sessions, which gave us a little bit of an interesting take and some folks at the top of the podium that we maybe weren't expecting in free practice. Heading into qualifying, it was more of the same. A lot of us were on edge as we saw Sergio Perez exit in Q1, Logan Sargent out qualifying him going into Q2, and a little bit of excitement as people weren't sure if Max would even make it to Q3, sitting in that 12th spot for a while. It was very exciting. We saw a good mix of folks in qualifying, with George taking the pole position. Heading into the race on Sunday, it was more of the same. We saw a very wet track to start, drying up over time. However, it did mess up some tire strategies, showing some excitement from Haas getting some early leads and movement through the field. But Ferrari bending it a little bit on strategy, providing a tough race for Charles, and Sainz with both cars eventually retiring. Among a whole bunch of other retirements as well. We saw a good 5 cars DNF this weekend, and we were seeing a good amount of movement as well. Lando Norris putting pressure on the front of the grid, taking the lead for a while. Max Verstappen inevitably taking the lead, but a lot of good movement from Albon and other folks through the midfield as well. And that is a minute and 15 seconds, which feels so much faster than it comes across.
You did really well there. I'll be very impressed. So I think let's just get right into FP1, FP2, FP3. We talked about how the weather played a factor, but I really found that it was everyone's game. Lando Norris, I think, topped the first practice ahead of Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc. The second free practice was held on the same day. Alonso ahead of George Russell and Lance Stroll, and even the third free practice was topped by Lewis Hamilton ahead of Max Verstappen, and I think it was George Russell. So already three different leaders and three different practices. It was a crapshoot. Who was going to win qualifying?
No one had any idea what was going on. We were seeing people really close to that elimination zone that we would expect to make it to Q3 all the way throughout. We saw some folks that we wouldn't expect to be putting up fast times sitting near the top of the grid. Like, people were very impressed. Sargent pulled out quite a good qualifying. Stroll was occasionally popping up near the top of the board for a while, which is lovely for a home Grand Prix. And then, of course, the hot button one of the weekend, Daniel Riccardo taking P5 and starting from fifth position on Sunday, which, after the incendiary comments that came from Jacque Villeneuve, I think people were very happy to see for Daniel.
And I think just to give some context for people that weren't probably not watching some of the live feeds from Sky Sports TV, Jacque Villeneuve, for those that don't know, he used to race in Formula One. He was a Canadian. He was the only Canadian to ever win the Drivers' Championship. He won in 1997. Said some pretty nasty stuff about Daniel Riccardo, and I don't want to quote the whole thing, but basically saying that why are they wasting time on his car? It actually, he's commented about Daniel Ricciardo back in
Hmm.
the Hungarian Grand Prix in 2023. He criticized Ricciardo's return to F1 and said that no other driver after 4 full seasons was allowed to return in F1. Sorry, I'm just laughing because the Zoom link is I'm
Yeah,
putting the
it's that
thumbs up.
thing, like, you know, on MacBooks when you do the thumbs up and suddenly it does it. I forget where I was, but I did air quotes in a business meeting, and all of a sudden I had fireworks going off in the background, and it was a very serious call.
But some very fire related comments, and I mean I was really thrown off. I don't know why was this really needed. But hey, if Jacque Villeneuve wants to go to every race and criticize Daniel Ricciardo and he gets P5 every time, I don't think
Oh, bring it on. Like, I think if that's going to fuel the fire, do it. Like, I think Danny Rick thrived under that. You could just hear in his comments at the end of the day on Saturday once it was brought to his attention, right? Like,
we're probably expecting an announcement for Red Bull Racing that Jacques Villeneuve will be the official spokesperson or chirper of the Red Bull Racing. Yeah, there were some really good drives from them. I mean, think about it. George Russell, Max Verstappen. I mean, George gets pole end of the day on Saturday. He tied Max Verstappen, and I think you and I talked about this. This is the first time there's been a tie since the 1997 European Grand Prix, where three drivers had the same exact times after that qualifying.
it was absolutely wild. The crowd was electric in that moment because no one knew what the deal was. Even Tyler sitting beside us was waiting to see if it was Max that took pole or if it was George. And I think what's even crazier is that it didn't just come down to the 10th, the 100th, or the 1000th. They had to go down, I think, to the 10,000th of a second, which, if you look at most of the reporting, they don't even have a fourth decimal place to do that. Like, if you look on the F1 website, which I am right now, it just says 1 minute 12 for both of them. It doesn't have enough decimal places to show where it differentiates.
They have like the official like documents, and like they don't have room to open up the columns even more for more zeros.
But it's very exciting. Like, if we look at the top 10 on qualifying, Lando was just behind them at 21 hundredths of a second, which just proves how tight it was for the top three. Oscar not far behind, 1/10 of a second off the leaders. Everyone, I mean, we were within 8/10ths of a second for every single person in the top 10. So even though, the conditions were changing throughout the course of qualifying, lots of track evolution as the cars went out and adapting to what they were seeing on the fly, it was a very tight qualifying session and realistically could have been one of any car taking that top position. But I'm glad it was George, because in the heat of the moment, he still managed to pop out his classic little T pose from the from the 2023 intro session.
I did. What's the movie? Is it always with Leonardo DiCaprio in Hollywood where he's snapping his fingers and pointing to the TV?
I know what you're talking about. I don't know which
There's
film
a
that
famous
is.
meme now. It's like every
Yeah.
time he's pointing, I'm like, oh yeah, I was like, I think I've seen that before. And that was where it was. Yeah, I think some notable disappointments. Ferrari didn't look like they were understanding, and we'll segue to the race. But going P11 and P12, not even making it in Q3 for I think the first time this year. Also, you had Sergio Perez, another dismal qualifying session, and he also had
He had
another.
just inked his contract for the extension too. Like,
And we talk about how Red Bull was comfortable with him as being the P2 driver, but he's not really the P2 driver right now. He's the 16th driver on the grid, it feels like. Yeah, and then I'm just trying to see if there's any notables, but I think you had the Alpines kind of mixing in the bottom there in qualifying. Yeah, so I think it was all in all, like the crowd was vibing very much on a very exciting qualifying, and it's always, especially being in the hairpin section, like you knew there was going to be a tussle whoever's going to go up top.
Yeah, absolutely. And the same energy came into Sunday with race day, right? We were seeing similar conditions on Sunday to what we saw when we arrived at the track on Saturday. It brought more excitement to it. Tons of folks at that hairpin kind of overshooting it a little bit, having to rejoin the track later on. And I still can't believe that the starting order we began with to the finishing order of this race were so different, like a huge contrast in what went down across all the teams on Sunday.
So you got to think about this. The Saubers had to change their rear rings during Parc Ferme, so they got relegated to the
Yeah.
pit lane start. You had both the Haas's start on wets, and
And just like rocket their way. Like, what was that? How you have so Kevin Magnussen started 14th and he was what, fifth after a
yeah,
couple laps? I think there's a video clip and I'm just screaming. Like it was absurd. Like I was so confused. Nico also making good movement through the pack as well. Like obviously with everyone on inters and it driving so fast, we knew it wouldn't last, but holy cow, like I didn't see that coming. Even when I saw them on the full wets with everyone else on inters.
they gained so much momentum, and then the track started to dry up. So this strategy of the wet tires, I think if it kept raining, it would have benefited them really
Yeah.
immensely. But then just like all that work they did, and then like I don't know if it was Kevin Magnussen, he had an 8.2 pit stop, like basically all that work you did for 20 something laps, and you're like, all right, that there goes. A couple of notable DNFs, but I mean, let's focus on the first four drivers. You had, Verstappen, Lando, George, I would say Oscar. Like it was a battle. It could have been anybody. And like obviously the safety car ended up benefiting Max Verstappen and kind of screwing Lando Norris towards the later of the race. But there was some you didn't know who was going to win this weekend.
No, it was very tight at the front of the grid right from the get-go. Good starts by both Lando and Max putting pressure on George immediately. We could see more and more. It seemed at first like it was very Max and George, but Lando, there's so much pace in that McLaren coming down the front straight that by the time they would get to the hairpin after a few laps, he was right on their bumpers. And we kind of knew it was only a matter of time before he caught up to them and was maybe making moves. Oscar starting from P4, also doing quite well. Fair gap behind the rest for a while, I would say, took him a little bit longer. But what was really exciting was the battle between Alonso and Hamilton just behind Oscar. We could tell for a long time that as much as Alonso is a great defender, we knew that there was going to be some money moves coming from Hamilton in a matter of time.
And it's interesting because like Hamilton said this was one of his worst races in
Yeah.
Canada, or like, and I was like, you went from I guess what he started, P7 to P4. George was P3. So like is the question, is Mercedes back? Question mark. Because like this was clearly their best weekend of the season. And they were really looking for some momentum. I think they're still trying to figure out who's going to get that second place at Mercedes. But I mean, in a weekend that you really wanted some momentum, I mean, Total Wolff was probably very happy when he left Montreal, probably Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, I was excited to see them there. We truly had, I think, the kind of fight people have wanted for like the last decade, because a decade ago is when we entered that Mercedes dominance era, which followed the Red Bull dominance, which went back into Red Bull dominance the last 3 years. And it really wasn't a question of which teams would be at the top. But we saw three different teams leading the race this weekend. We saw Mercedes, McLaren, and Red Bull. And we saw other teams higher up in those standings than I think traditionally we would have expected.
Mhm.
And I quite frankly love that. I think it makes it more exciting. And this is what fans are wanting out of the sport. They want it to be unpredictable and they want it to have to come down to the strategy and those last minute decisions and Hail Marys that come from the teams in order to put someone on the podium.
Controversial opinion, but I think McLaren is the second car right now.
I'm pausing for a moment. I feel like I've just have been hurt before, so I'm always scared and there's still so much of the season left. But you know, the guy sitting in front of us had said McLaren won 3, which I felt was, or I think he even said one too, and I was like, I don't buy it, but I think we'll get at least one on the podium, and we did. Um, I was very comfortable with that, and I'm very excited because they went through it 2 years ago, and the start of last season was abysmal. So whatever pivot they made, whatever conceptual change they made to the car is clearly panning out. We'll see how long it lasts, given that the 2026 regs were released. But it's exciting. Like even if we look at the top 10, six different teams in the top 10, which I don't think we've had in a while. It was pretty classic, the same five teams in the top 10. But we saw a lot of movement too. It wasn't, two teams back to back. We have a Red Bull, a McLaren, we've got Mercedes, Aston Martin, which awesome for them and for Lance to score points in his home race coming in at P7. P8, Daniel Riccardo, would have loved to have seen him hang on to that P5 just to like really rub the salt in the wound for Jacque Villeneuve at a circuit named after his father. So, really would have kind of driven it home. But both Alpines scoring points, which,
But
you
kind of
know,
controversial.
like I'm shocked. I mean, granted, we had five cars DNF, so I think that has a lot to do with it. But yeah, like at least they have points. So
They team ordered Ocon to let Pierre Gasly go ahead of him. And I in a game where you're just trying to get all points as possible, and I don't think anybody was close to them. I think Hulkenberg was maybe 500ths of a second behind, but still, nevertheless, the drama at Alpine will continue for the rest of the season now that Ocon does not have a seat. It was just pretty spicy to hear that, and I would recommend anybody listen to Ocon's like post race interview. He started saying that like that was wrong. I was a team player or something on the lines of that. I still haven't finished. It was pretty spicy.
when I think of Ocon, I don't exactly think team player. So we'll see what comes of that. But let's talk about the drivers that didn't get to the finish line. Ricci, how were you feeling about Ferrari? What was going on over in the garage there?
I feel like you've been listening to me all day in the office today and yesterday because I've had multiple people come up to my desk and they're like, Ricci from the F1 podcast, like, what are your thoughts about Ferrari? And I was just like, I don't know about you, but seeing a double DNF in person is really depressing.
It was
Like,
one thing when I saw it on TV last year. I can only imagine what it was like for you in person this year.
well, I know. Watch that reel of the drinking the beers. That I think that really summarizes it. It was weird because they looked pretty competitive in FP1 and FP2. And then all of a sudden, FP3, they didn't really look their strongest on qualifying. And I don't know if it was a tire strategy or just a strategy in general. But I mean, if you're going to start P10 and P11, you're already going to be behind a number of cars to start.
Oh, they
Um,
started P11 and
Oh,
P12.
sorry, yeah, P11, P12, my apologies. And clearly it just was not working out for either of the drivers. The changing of conditions. Who thought it was a good idea to push Charles Leclerc on hards when the track was absolutely damp? And then he gets overpassed by Max Verstappen and like the rest. And I just like, I don't know, it didn't make sense. I think it maybe have been, I'm hoping that it was a one-off weekend for them. But I did love how Fred Vasseur said to Jacque Villeneuve, speaking about Ferrari, that you're not always right.
Yep.
That was a quite nice little dig. Yeah, I mean, again, like this was a weekend of potential where they could have easily caught up to Red Bull or made it more interesting since that Sergio Perez not only did not qualify really well, but got into an accident and DNF'd himself. And he actually has now received a 3 grid place penalty for Spain because he didn't properly bring the car into a safe area. He kept driving on it when it was literally falling apart.
Yeah, and that was interesting because apparently that was team orders. It wasn't him deciding to do that. It was Red Bull on the radio telling him to bring it around into the pits. So, was it worth it? I don't know. There's a lot of people kind of questioning motives. Will Buxton compared it to Singapore 2008, which I think is taking it a little far.
Mm-hmm.
For those of you who don't know, there were deliberate orders from a team telling a driver to crash to cause a safety car and have someone win the race. So I wouldn't take it that far. I wouldn't say this was deliberate,
Oh, so that's
but
what. Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt because I think that's the whole point about Felipe Massa's argument in court.
Yeah, so if you look it up, like 2008, Singapore 2008 Crashgate, it was the Renault Formula One controversy. So they're saying that Nelson Piquet Jr. deliberately crashed. It gave an advantage to Fernando Alonso, which just,
And he's still racing today.
yeah, Fernie, I've decided I'm calling him Fernie for the rest of the episode. Fernie's still racing. PK is just out there, and exactly that. I think that's part of what Massa's been arguing about the last few years. I still think it's a stretch because there was like clear, deliberate instructions to PK to do that, whereas this was just, I think, poor choice of stuff from Red Bull, but quite the time to be alive. But he's not the only person that we saw crash and have some issues. We saw a few other folks spinning out and running into some issues as well. So what was a bad start to Ferrari got worse with the double DNF. We also had Alexander Albon, who after a textbook masterclass double overtake on the back straight, which just was beautiful. Like there's a clip of me as we're there at the track going, this guy's a good driver. Like just as I'm watching it on the screen, which was unfortunate to see because both Williams ended up DNFing. Logan Sargent had a bit of a mishap as well. And I honestly think like Albon was doing quite well. They would have stood to score some good points and had a good showing for their team that week. So two teams with a double DNF
But
and the unexpected Sergio Perez in there.
and it also, I mean, leave it to Logan Sargent too. To
Uh,
Logan Sargent.
I felt so bad. Like this guy, if a season could go worse, it would still happen to him. It wouldn't happen to another person, that's for sure. The Alex Albon one though, I need to try to find it, but I actually have a video on the screen of the crash. And it was pretty intense. We saw with the weather, it caused a lot of chaotic crashes. The Porsche GT Carrera, like the Porsche Carrera GT Cup that went in the morning, there was carnage when we arrived afterward, and then some big mess ups elsewhere during the weekend.
You also also the Ferrari race.
The Ferrari challenge, we
Yeah.
saw quite a bit of stuff going on. So no surprise that it also happened in the F1 race, but you kind of hate to see it from folks that you're hoping will do well and succeed.
It was interesting because all of our focus was on the top, 5 drivers, but then all just everything kind of going completely wrong for a number of them. And I mean, it's going to be tough to see. Like I can only imagine who's leading the Destructors Constructors group, or what
Oh,
Destructors
the
Championship.
World Destructors Championship.
But I think some of the key takeaways I saw this weekend is like, Mercedes is coming back, missed opportunity for Ferrari. Those McLarens are keeping it very close in the constructors now that like Lando's only now 7 back from Leclerc,
Ooh.
and McLaren is 212 and Ferrari is still 252. So there is some cushion in the constructors. But yeah, a total missed opportunity where they could have made it much closer, and especially when if Sergio is going to continue to struggle. I think Yuki Tsunoda did not have a good weekend as well. He did start P8 and then he ended up P14. I have to remember what happened to him. I'm currently blanking on what happened in terms of strategy or if he crashed or something. But I mean, and he also like re-signed. That was also another big thing that happened the weekend is he re-signed with RB Honda or RB V card. I keep forgetting what it's called, but
That was exciting, a 1 year contract extension for him. And I think it's making a lot of people kind of question it. A lot of folks thought he would leave, but staying for an extra year and hearing that there's already murmurs at Red Bull of warnings to Perez that that 2 year contract does have some clauses in it, I think is raising a lot of eyebrows. Yeah, unfortunate weekend for Yuki, but still did better than Perez in the long run. But if we go back to the World Destructors Championship for a second, someone posted an update on Reddit after the Canadian Grand Prix. Sergio Perez is leading it with $2,769,000 in damage. Alexander Albon is behind him with $2,270,750. Zhou Guanyu 1.4, Ricardo 1.2, Sargent 1.1, Stroll 1.1, Fernando around 1, K-Mag around 1, and there's only two drivers who currently have not caused damage to their cars, putting them in the running. Can you guess who those two drivers are?
I'm gonna say Verstappen and I was gonna say Kevin Magnussen, but that doesn't make sense. Oliver Behrman?
So Ollie Behrman is not a part of this because he was obviously just in the one race, but it's actually Pierre Gasly
No.
and Lewis Hamilton.
Okay, Lewis Hamilton, I bet, but like Pierre, oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Especially with that
so
collision in Monaco.
I'm kind of questioning this as well. I'm wondering if they have some sort of like wash in it, like at the end, but I think was it not Ocon's car that got the brunt of that?
I'm pretty sure it was.
So, because Ocon is sitting right now at P9 in the Destructors Championship. But yeah, we've got some folks with only a modest amount. Like Yuki, I only see like 5 grand here, Lando 100. So quite a bit of, differential there from the low end to the high end of it. But I have questions about the math. But there's so many jokes of people being like Max leading them to a constructors championship or like world drivers championship, and Perez leading them to a world destructors championship. The only thing Perez is winning this year is the WDC, the World Destructors Championship, all kinds of comments. And it's it's interesting. So we'll see how the rest of this goes. It'll be uh it'll be interesting. Maybe they'll get the triple crown over at Red Bull this year. They'll get both the drivers, the constructors, and destructors championship. So who knows?
I guess what you're looking for Spain, but like anything additionally stood out for you this weekend. We're gonna save a fun episode for next weekend for our fan meetups and stuff that we saw around the track and answer any questions that fans have. But anything from a race perspective, like I still believe this was the race of the season. So
Yeah, still the race of the season. I think, like many people, my eyes are going to be fiercely glued to Ferrari in Spain to see if they've sorted out what's going on. Because you go from the high of Monaco to this 2 weeks later, it's very confusing. You're hoping it's a blip and not a return to kind of 2022 form from the team. So I am anxiously awaiting what will go on there. And I think the second will be McLaren. I mean, we've had a very racy last couple of go abouts the track from them, and I'm excited to see if maybe, we've got more podiums. Another podium for Oscar would be nice to add to the collection, and if we're going to keep seeing that mix of teams at the front of the grid as we head into yet another week of racing.
well, next week is an off week for the F1 calendar. So tune in to next week's episode of the F1 podcast. We got a lot to talk about. And Erica, another fun weekend in Montreal. We're excited to go again next year. And maybe I'll wear this shirt that I got from the ladies from I Give an F1 podcast, the Carlos signs, if he signs for Williams or if he is somehow stays in that Ferrari seat. Maybe you never know. But
Stay in the Ferrari seat, bro. Lewis Hamilton's got it. What are you
I'm
saying?
kidding. I'm kidding. I really love this shirt, and I'll make sure I post it in the comment section below. But thank you for tuning into this week's episode. We got a lot of fun reels and a lot of fun pictures, so make sure to check out
And
at
TikToks.
and TikToks. I forgot about that. On our social media channels on Instagram, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TikTok, Threads, and Twitch. I think I got them all. But Erica, any last parting words before we take off for next week's episode?
I just want to say thank you to everyone who stopped to say hi and come out. We'll talk more about it next week. But yeah, stay tuned to some of those channels. I have furiously been posting things. It's been a resolution of mine that I wasn't so good at the first 6 months of the year. So lots of good lols, funs, chuckles, all of that to come. And we will talk to you again soon ahead of Spain.